Hafmanal, I'm going to read through the din first, and we'll explain it after. It's called Kalim Afil Shacheres. All Kalim, even they made it Cheres, Shenishtamesh Behem Chometz B'Tzoinin, that use them for Chometz for cold. So Mutlu Shamash Matzah Afil B'Chamen. So you could use them for pasty food, even hot, because they have no bleas in them. So if it has no bleas, so you could do whatever you want with it.
So what would you use in the year?
You would use for Chometz, for cold Chometz during the year. So you could use it for Pesach, but even for hot food, because there's no bleed in it. You just clean it off and it's fine. Chutz from Beis or Beis Charosis, except for a Beis or and Beis Charosis, which is the containers that hold either Sa'ar, that's the sourdough. You leave bread to sit around, and the yeast grows and grows and grows until there's lots of yeast in it, and then use that tomorrow to bake your bread in it. So it's like a container full of yeast, which is the Torah says that's also on Pesach. Beis Charosis is a bowl. It's what we like a salad dressing. That's what we call it. A charosis that use at the Seder. Charosis means a dressing. It's like a vinegar-based dressing, and they used to use flour in it also. So those things, you only use them for cold during the year. Also, you can't put hot matzah into it because we say it has a blia. We'll explain more in a minute. It's assumed that it has a blia from these things, even without rules of coverage and things like that. It has a blia in it, and now they use it for hot. But if you want to use it for cold, like to put in baked matzahs into the mutter, it's fine because it's true that it's chametz, but those blias of chametz can't get into your food. But even though even though you're allowed to use it for cold pasty of food, you're not allowed to knead dough in it, which is also a cold thing. And we'll talk about those in the second one. So all this I'm telling you that you're not allowed to use it in certain ways is if you didn't do Hagolah. I feel Beis Or v'Charosis Mutarim, but if you do Hagolah, then you could use even the Beis Or and the Beis Charosis and Einim Shacharis if they're not made of Charis. Avol Shacharis, one Mahani Hagolah, that's a regular rule that you can't do Hagolah for Kli Charis. Even if you use them for cold for chametz or yishtamesh in matzah afil b'tzoyin, you shouldn't use them for matzah even cold. And now he's fixing in words. We'll explain where this comes from. Also, this is from a riff. That's why he even says it in Aramaic. Nowadays the minig is to loylish tamushe bepischa b'mani b'pach pratiki. The minig is to not use a used cheres kelim. I mean, either they were used for cold during the year, and they can be used for cold on Pesach. The minig is to not use chametz kelim. Chametz cheres kelim on Pesach at all. That were chametz, even though they were clean. And the oven that you use for heating your house, which is made out of cheres, dino kli cheres. This is the Rama talking about the kli cheres. But also, shum davar al hatan Pesach. Can't put anything onto the hatan Pesach. And the reason is because they would use it. It's like a radiator, and people would warm up food stick food onto the radiator during the year. So it's made out of cheres. And this is a rule going back to the way beginning of the simon, that since the fire is on the inside, but the food is on the outside. So when you want to do liban to this kli, you have to put the fire on the side that the food is on. And since the food is on the outside, you put the food on top of your radiator. So you have to do liban to have the fire on the outside. And so here, this radiator gets burning hot. It's an oven to warm up your house. It gets burning hot, but you can't get the fire onto the outside. The fire's on the inside. So therefore, you can't put food onto the Pesach because we're going to put food onto the...
It's in the keli, right?
The food is going right onto it. We'll talk about it if it's in the keli later. Okay? Right. We'll talk about you're just putting something onto there to defrost. You're putting something right onto there. So then, since the food goes on the outside, the libun has to be from the outside. Since you can't do libun on the outside, the fire's on the inside. So therefore, you can't put food onto it on Pesach. Okay. So now this whole din here, this base arm by charosis, if you remember, we first had in halacha tezayin and yudzayin, and I said we'll talk about it here. Okay, so what we're talking about is like this. The Gemara says, the Gemara brings this din that the base arm and the base charosis, you can't use them for cold. Okay, and there's a big, and the reason is because the words of the Gemara is because it's chimutzay kasher. Okay, what does that mean? That means is that they have a strong chimutz. What does that mean? So in the way we'll explain it, this is really what Rashi says there, is that these things are talking about either you have sa'ar or you have vinegar in this thing, meaning there's live microorganisms growing in this thing, things that can potentially cause chimutz in the future, or they're causing chimutz right now. So that has an effect on the kli very different very different than a regular piece of cold food. If I put a cold beer, maybe beer would be an example. I put a cold thing that's chametz into the thing. I put something else that's into it. What's it going to do? But this base art, think about it. The whole thing it's a ball of dough which is becoming more and more fermented as the yeast is growing and growing in this thing. So the Gemara says that has a stronger effect on the kli, and even though there's no heat and there's no coverage and nothing like that, yet blias go into the kli anyhow. Okay.
You find such a thing by Shardasurim, an equivalent concept?
I don't, not that I know of, but here you realize that it's special because here chimutz is the presence and the koyach that the microorganisms has is very much to do with what you now do on Pesach, as opposed to in other isurim. If you have stam yain that's made out of chimutz or kosher vinegar like that, has nothing to do with the isser. The fermentation of it has nothing to do with the isser. Okay, but I'm not sure. I don't know of it from other things. I know of it just from here from Pesach. Okay. Now the Ran says yes. He says it's very nice that the chimutz or kosher is going to make blia go into the kli. Somehow that's going to push blias into the kli without any heat. He says, but why can't you use it for cold? What's going to happen? So the kli will become sick. So what? Okay, this is just from the Gemara side. The Gemara says you can't use it for cold. He says, why not? He says, what's going to happen? How's the blia going to get out of the walls of the kli? You push the blias in through the chimutz or kosher, but now you're going to put a potato into it on Pesach. So what's going to happen? How are you going to get the blias out? Okay, so there's a whole bunch of answers. Most of the answers are from the Ran. Basically, brings a whole group of answers. First answer is, he says that there's a rule by stam yain that if you have a kli that's machnis l'kiyum, you have a kli that's used all the time for stam yain, then not only can't you put kosher wine into it where it would be for 24 hours, you can't even put it into it for a second. If you put something into for a second into a kli that's machnis l'kiyum, midrabanan, we say that there's a blia right away. Okay, so if you go to a place that they store wine, a place that makes wine, so they have tanks that store wine, they're machnis l'kiyum, they keep wine in there for days and days and days, more than 72 hours at a shot. It stays in there forever. Basically, it stays there for long times at a shot. The kli becomes usher to the point that if you put stuff in there even for a minute, it becomes the wine into it for a minute, it'll become usher. So the Ran says maybe chametz has the same kind of a din. If you have these kalim that are used for a long time for sa'ar, okay, one of the details of a machnis l'kiyum is that machnis l'kiyum, even though I said it has to be for 3 days straight, they don't have to be 3 days with every single minute. It's not like kavush. You have to have all 24 hours. It has to be in there straight. I mean, it's basically always full. So if you have this base R, that there's always dough into it. So he says maybe it'll be like that kind of a din, like you say in the hilchos in stam yain, that a machnis l'kiyum, it's also even if something just touches it, just as soon as something goes into it. So maybe it has that kind of a din. Or he says maybe Chazal said if you're going to let people use it for cold, then they're using it for hot. When you let them use it for cold solids, they'll use it for cold liquids and have coverage into it. If that's what the Gemara is saying, then this din is a makar to what the Ramah's minig that says that we have a minig to not use treif of kalim for kosher, even for cold. Like there's such a minig that we don't use treif kalim even temporarily for cold, for kosher. He brings his minig, so maybe the Gemara is right there. Okay. Then the Rif says, and this is the end of the din, which is the Rif says, maybe this din is special for cheres. And he says, why? The Gemara's case is talking about cheres. Maybe it's special for cheres because by cheres you can't possibly kasher. So then we're more afraid that you'll use it for yourself. Or he says, maybe cheres, whatever this is supposed to mean. Since cheres is belay so much, we say it's ein yotzim the element has so much bleed into it. Therefore, it's belay so much it becomes like gufa iser. And just like you wouldn't touch a potato onto a piece of bread on Pesach, you wouldn't let potato touch it, even though it's cold and there's officially no blias, but nobody would do that. So he says, also, you're not allowed to have the cold Pesach of food touch this thing because it's like as if a piece of chametz, whatever that's supposed to be. Okay? And because of that, because we're choishes for that, we're not really choishes, that's not the din, but we're choishes for it, that's why the Mechaber says at the end, the minute, what the Rif says, we're in Nalgo Alma, that we don't use any cheres kalim on Pesach. A kli cheres that had been used for chametz, even if it was used for cold, the minig is we don't use those kalim to Pesach, even for cold. Okay, that's the Mechaber says, we're in the Nalgo Alma, this is from the Rif, Loilish Tamusha B'Pischel B'Mani to Pachra Atiki, because he holds, according to the Rif, the reason why the Gemara said you're not allowed to use the face or base charetz, it has nothing to do with things or none of that stuff. It's because since it's cheres, the Cheres becomes like the Gofa Yisur, and then you can't have anything touched on Pesach. Okay. And Rashi says, and this is what the din is. Rashi says the Pshat Mikmar is like this: the Beis was balei because it's chimutza kosher, and the Gemara means to say you're not allowed to put dough into it. If you want to put cold matzah into it, no problem. That's fine. That's what the din says. That's in our din. It's like Rashi. You could do that. The issue is to put dough into it, and the reason is because I'm a little adding it to modern words. The reason is because the yeast is still sitting there on the side of the clay. Think about it. You put dough into there, and you wiped it all off. Okay, but you're not doing it to the point that you're getting all the, we'll use modern words, the microorganisms off of this thing. You're not getting everything clean from that side. So if you put Pesach dough into this thing, you're making a dough to make matzahs on Pesach. So that dough will pick up from the yeast that's around there, and it'll ferment faster. Okay, that's how Rashi learns it, and that's how it is. That's what the din is following that shot of Rashi. That if you want to put a Pesach of food, you want to put a potato into it, that's not a problem. You want to put baked matzahs that can't become chametz anymore, that's also not a problem. The only issue is when you're putting into it, Pesach dough means flour and water, Pesach of flour and water. They were afraid that the leftover yeast that's in the walls will ferment the food faster. Okay, so this is the good news is that we finally understand the halacha and Hazal's Genom. We finally can imagine what it's talking about. This is not bleas. This is a matter of that there's leftover yeast or other acetobacters, whatever things are floating around in this thing from the base or the base covers are floating around like chametz faster. But it also means is that this din has come out not negated to us. Okay, except the end part about Kashrus, because nobody anymore makes matzahs at home. Okay, they used to. Everybody used to do that. They used to bake their own matzahs, but nobody does it anymore. Nobody touches Pesach flour, but nobody takes it in house. It's only again in a matzah bakery.
It's not again even if you make matzahs before Pesach.
Good question. I'm not sure. The way Rashi's learning, I don't see why it should make a difference, because Rashi learns that the yeast that's in there will make it well, the end part, the minute to not use Kashrus, that means of course on Pesach. That means to not use on Pesach. But this thing about, I would think, according to the way Rashi's learning, which is what the thing is, according to the way Rashi's learning, what should be different if it's on Pesach or not? It's going to be making the same type of No, it's not. We're not talking about Masha. We're talking about that it'll be Mechametz faster. The yeast that's there will make it be Mechametz.
Right.
Okay, I'm not sure. I would think that's the same. I'm not sure. But it's negated. It's very negated to a matzah bakery, because most matzah bakeries that I know of, the way they work is they're not bakery all year round. I'm not talking about a hand matzah. I'm talking about a machine matzah bakery. Is not a matzah bakery all year round. Not a Pesach matzah bakery all year round. Most of the year they're making chametz. For a few months a year they make Pesach food, and the rest of the year they're making crackers and cookies and other things. They're making all kinds of chametz the whole year round. Same machinery. What they do is they make chametz everything.
They're not based on the matzah. The same machine you can put cookies in the same.
I can't tell you that. Okay, you're right. Maybe this machine can't be and this machine can be, but the places they're using, they for sure are making crackers. They make all kinds of stuff in these places that are potentially chametz. No one's for sure paying any attention whether the bowl, whether the bowl that holds flour and water doesn't sit there for 18 minutes. No one's paying any attention to anything. They just make whatever they want to. So that those if they have, I don't know if they do, but if they have a kli that's going to be a base R, they're going to sit and mix the flour and water together. They could just sit there for a while, or they actually put yeast in and they're going to sit there for a while. Then they wouldn't be able to say, well, I'm going to use it for Pesach, I'll just clean it out. Because it's just used cold, I can just clean it out.
So why is it common with Beis or? Beis means something that you hold sour dough in it. You don't hold sour dough in it. There might be some leftover dough that's getting a little bit or whatever, but it's not, I don't know if it has a...
Okay, good. So you think even they're not going to have, even in this kind of a place, even if they made mamash chametz, so they're not going to have, if they made a batter, you're saying, and it sat there for all, you're right. Okay, so maybe even they're not going to have it. So you're saying it's mamash, okay, then it's mamash not negated to us. Because the way Rashi learns, which is what the din is, that it's only usher to put Pesach dough into it. So it's not again whoever makes Pesach dough. So it's not. We don't make sa'ar either. But okay, so it's even less again. Okay. Then at the end, later in the din, it said, what do you do if you want to kasher this thing? So this is all the din of how you could use it if you don't kasher, which is what the Gemara talks about.
Is the base kill?
It's what?
Is that the same sar? What is it called? The base kill?
I don't know what that is.
What you're talking about the wine. Putting in wine.
The machlis l'kim?
L'kim, yeah.
Yes.
that the same soil that there's microorganisms?
No, it's not, because that has nothing to do with the Isser. The fermentation has nothing to do with the Isser. Here, fermenting...
Does that negate kind of, let's say, these little plants that hold milk in their silos, and once in a while they'll get soy, but if we tell them...
No, the Machnis Lakim is only for wine. It's a special thing for Stam Yain. It's a Drabanan that if you're Machnis Lakim, you can't put wine, kosher wine, to it even for a minute, or else it becomes usher as soon as you put it in. It's a special thing for Stam Yain. It has nothing to do with milk. It's not a place...
It's not doing color.
No, it's nothing to do with that. It's a special thing for wine, a kli that's always used for wine. You're not allowed to put kosher wine into it even for a minute, because then it's safe, because you might leave it for longer. So you wanna Kashrus. So that the Gemara doesn't say anything about Kashrus. The Gemara says you can't use it. The Gemara says you can't use it. So there's a machlokes rishon. We would think, at first I would have thought that what you need to do is takol to it. There isn't even any fire in this thing. It's a cold lump of dough sitting in a kli. So you think but most you got to do is to do hakol to this thing, which is what most Rishonim hold, and what the Mechaber says, you do hakol to it. But the truth, but then Rashi says that you have to do libun to it. You can't kasher even with hakol. And the truth is, the Gemara doesn't say anything. It doesn't say libun or hakol. So I guess it doesn't make. We would have guessed that it didn't need any kashering at all. Just didn't cold it. Once it says it has a bliya, Rashi says it has the chimutze kosher has such an effect that you have to even libun gomer to it. Okay, which is a tremendous chiddush, because when the Gemara is saying don't use it, so if you're saying and you have to kasher with hakol. So okay, so I guess it's like sort of we're supposed to imagine that there's a way to kasher it, but to say that the Gemara meant and you have to leave into it, it's a chiddush, because it doesn't say anything like that. You think the Gemara would want to tell you that piece of information? Okay, so what's the din? So this din, oddly enough, is in 3 places. It's here in Chaf Beis, and it was in Tezayin and Yudzayin. Okay, and in each place the Mechaber says you do hagol. He passes like most Rishonim that you do hagol to it, and in each place the Ramah says something different. This is the Taz of Kashrus. In Tezayin he says you should do libun kal if you can. Okay, you should try to be machmer for the sheet of Rashi to do libun. Since libun is only a chumrah, you could do libun kal. But if you can't do it, it's okay. You can do hagol also. That's what the Ramah says in Tezayin. In Yudzayin he says he's talking about a wooden board that you knead on, that you have kneading dough on it. Actually, you see there the idea of what a base or is. It doesn't have to even be the whole balls of yeast. They even talk about that you're kneading dough on it. So the Ramah says there, you can't kasher them, because obviously you can't do libun to a piece of wood. So it's a wooden board. So there he's saying you have to do libun, like Rashi, and if you can't do it too bad, you can't kasher it at all. And in our din, the Ramah says nothing. Okay, so the Taz says, what's going on here? In one place he says, try to do libun kal, and if you can't, you get away with hagol. In another place he says, you got to do libun gomer, and since you can't do it because it's wood, so forget it, you can't do anything. And in our case, he says nothing. The Mechaber says do hagol, and then Ramah says nothing. So what the Taz says, what's going on here? How do you put these 3 things together? Okay, so the Mishnah Berurah answers sort of the Taz and sort of a Magen Avraham. It's a mix of what the answer is, which is like this: that there's 2 reasons to not be allowed to do hagol for these kind of kelim. One is because of what we're saying. Rashi holds that you're supposed to do libun for the space R. For that, if you can do it, good, and if you can't, then you can get away without it also. Okay? If you can't do a libun, then you can do hagol also. But there's another reason, which is in a lot of these kind of kelim, there's problems of the end being stuck in the kli. They're wooden kelim that have people are handling all the time. There's problems of the end getting stuck into them. So then for that you have to do libun in order to get rid of the end that's on the kli. Okay, there for example the Mechaber says if you want to sand down the kli, that's fine also. The chash is just the end, that the surface is not going to be clean. So if you'll sand it down, that'll do the trick also. Okay, so there's 2 different reasons. There's 2 different reasons as to why you have to libun. Either you have to libun because of the Rashi, which is only a l'chadchila if you can do it, and the other is you have to libun because of the end. So even though the dinim are all talking about the same kind of cases, the reasons for libun in the different cases are not the same thing. They're really different reasons, and that's why sometimes Ramah says something and sometimes he doesn't. Okay, a side point that's here, which is what Shalom brought up, and which there's a long Mishnah Berurah about it here, which is this thing about putting food onto the radiator. So the Mishnah Berurah says, but of course, if you had and say, take back that word, of course. He says, if you had a kli in between the radiator and the food, then there wouldn't be a problem. Okay, there wouldn't be a problem because the bli is not going to be able to transfer without any liquid from the radiator into the kli so that you get into your food. Okay, that's what the Mishmur says. To me, you could read it yourself. It's this Mishmur Kuf Lamed Vav. It seemed to me that he said the same din 2 times. One implies that even l'chatchila you could warm it up with a kli in between, and one sounds like yeah, but if you did it, then it's okay. Okay, there's 2 different mashmois to me as to whether is this din mutal l'chatchila or it's not mutal l'chatchila, which is a question we talked about before, and Yossi and I talked about it also. Is this that we say that no bli is transferred between 2 kalim that touch each other without any liquid in between? Does that mean that now l'chatchila you're allowed to do that? Could you say why not? No bli can transfer, or they say no, you're not allowed to do l'chatchila because of Kashrus and things like that. And there's a question how to read a Ramah in Tzadi Beis, I think it is. How to read a Ramah, whether he says you are not allowed to do that. There's a Ksaf Sefer about it in Siman Nun Dalet. The Ksaf Sefer about it. He says you. No, the shadow is that in din there's no bli that's going to transfer. The shadow is whether the Ramah says that it's a minig to not let the kalim touch each other. I guess it's because of a chashash. All you need is a little liquid to spill in between them, then the blias will transfer. Okay, I guess. Ksaf Sefer says that it's mutal l'chatchila, and as it probably does from Shafter. But the problem with all this is reading the Ramah. The Ramah in Tzadi Beis sure sounds like you're not, I think it's in Tzadi Beis. It sure sounds like you're not allowed to. The Ramah comes from Minister Beheter, who's even stronger that the minig means even to not do l'chatchila. So that's just a question. And the Mishabur seems to have 2 different ways to read it. 2 different times that he says it, whether it's mutal or l'chatchila. It could be that the answer to Mishabura, which would mean that you're allowed to do l'chatchila, is that one of his cases is there's a chashash that there might still be food left on the radiator. Okay, so you just put something on top of it, and there might be food left onto it. In that case, you understand why the l'chatchila you shouldn't be doing it. If there's food left over, the food will help to transfer the blias. It won't be just from the keli to keli. As the other cases might have been much more of a serious. You put down a piece of metal, it might be more of a serious case. And one last thing is that back to what we said before, the Magen Avram says, he talks about this also about putting a thing in between, that you could put a mappa in between the kli and your food, and that will make it mutter. And the Magen Avram says, but the mappa, just a napkin, is not going to help for things that will chip if you're going to do dough in it. Because this chashash that we have, that the yeast, I'm putting words into this now, but that the yeast is going to penetrate into the kli, that's not going to be stopped by the mappa. So blias will be stopped by putting a mop in between them because you're using it for cold. But this chashash that you're going to have yeast spreading into the food, that has nothing to do with it, and that's also even with a mop in between.